Over the course of the semester, my presentations have all been about Abraham Lincoln or his legacy in my hometown, Petersburg. Putting them all together to give a more full view of the town would be interesting, so that's what my final project is. The first thing I'll talk about is the Lincoln statue. This statue in particular is really special because it represents Abraham Lincoln as the young man he was in New Salem, Petersburg, and Springfield. Normally, statues depict him as the national icon, the 16th president, the man who freed the slaves and won the Civil War. And he is that, but he's also someone who was just another member of the community in New Salem. The statue honors local history and significance to the local community and its culture, where that local history normally would have been completely overshadowed by national history. Something that is cool about the statue is that the guy who made it, Avid Fairbanks, actually recorded the process in a journal article which is still accessible today. Fairbanks was actually a sculptor from Utah, but he made over 100 installations across the country during his career. So the journal article is both a glimpse into how the Abraham Lincoln statue was made and why it was made, but it also shows the work of someone who is very skilled and experienced in his profession. Two or three statues were made by Fairbanks, and one was gifted to the state of Illinois to be placed in New Salem State Park. The second thing I'll talk about is the Anne Rutledge grave slash monument. Supposedly, Anne Rutledge was Lincoln's first love, but she died in 1835 when typhoid passed through New Salem. The story may or may not be true. I personally think that it is likely exaggerated, but regardless of whether or not it's a true story, a lot of people like it, and a monument was made to Anne Rutledge on top of her grave. The cemetery definitely doesn't look that nice, but I imagine the monument does. Lastly, I'll talk about the Edgar Lee Masters home. Basically, it's one of three houses that the poet Edgar Lee Masters lived in as a child before he turned 11 and moved to Lewiston. There is absolutely nothing special about the house or the structure itself. It's a common home from the late 1800s. The reason it is still around is because it was about to be demolished so that a new high school could be built, but someone convinced the city to disassemble and relocate it, and that had just been done with every single log cabin in New Salem just decades before. Today, the house is essentially like an extension of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum and Library, except it's still technically owned by the city of Petersburg. So, why is Edgar Lee Masters so special that a random house he happened to live in needed to be preserved? It's because he was a poet, specifically because his poetry book, Spoon River Anthology, gained international attention in the early 1900s and was the main thing that was being talked about in poetry in America for a pretty good amount of time. Spoon River Anthology is unique because its literary style was to use confessional epitaphs similar to ancient Greek poems that were popular at the time, except Edgar Lee Masters wrote the poems in free verse. Some people really liked that, and some people thought it was awful, but either way, it was really revolutionary for the time, and Edgar Lee Masters pioneered it. Spoon River Anthology also contains poems which are about people who knew Lincoln, like Anne Rutledge or Hannah Armstrong, which is why it is part of Lincoln's legacy. Edgar Lee Masters also just wrote about Lincoln a lot in general outside of this specific poetry book. overall, I think that the Lincoln statue and Rutledge grave and Edgar Lee Masters' home are all really good things to have in a town like Petersburg. Menard County, and by extension Petersburg, has a very high poverty rate as well as a very strong climate of classism, which oppresses the working class there. People who are struggling just to survive aren't going to be able to value art or even experience life in the way all people should be able to. So, forms of public art, historic houses, or monuments like the Lincoln statue are needed to help bring that humanity back to them. Not everyone will feel welcome in museums, so things like this are important.